The phone rang just 3 days before my sister's wedding. I was on a rare weekend leave, a small pocket of peace I was genuinely looking forward to, despite the complicated history with my family. I saw the caller ID and picked up. It was my father, Mark, a man whose approval I'd stopped chasing years ago, but whose disapproval could still land like a physical blow. There was no hello, no preamble, just a voice as cold and flat as a stone, a tone he reserved specifically for me when I had failed some unspoken test. He said, "Don't bother coming to the wedding." The words just hung there in the air, completely disconnected from reality. I asked him why, my own voice sounding distant and small even to my own ears. He told me that my sister, Jessica, was just too stressed out and that my presence would be a distraction. A distraction. After all these years, after everything I had done to build a life for myself, that's what I was reduced to in their eyes. A minor inconvenience to be managed for the sake of the main event. But then the real reason spilled out, ugly and familiar. It was about money. I had refused to give them another $10,000 for Jessica's dream honeymoon fund. This was on top of the wedding gift I'd already sent, a check that represented months of careful saving, far more than I could comfortably afford. That gift wasn't enough, though. It never was. To them, my bank account wasn't my own. It was just a family resource they believed they were entitled to, a resource I was selfishly hoarding. He said the words I think I'd been waiting my whole life to hear, the ones that finally drew the line in the sand. "We needed that money, and you said no. You've always been selfish. If you can't support this family properly, then you're not a part of it." And then, a click. He was gone. A few hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from the family group chat. My mother, Susan, a woman who treated my sister's happiness as a full-time job, had posted a glowing new family photo from the bridal shower. And right below it, a system message informed me that I had been removed from the group. I had been digitally and officially erased. And the worst part? As I sat there in the sterile silence of my government-issued housing, I wasn't even surprised. It was just the loudest echo of a story they had been writing for me my entire life. That phone call wasn't a beginning, it was an ending. It was the final, neatly typed period on a long and painful story that had been my entire life. To understand why being uninvited from a wedding felt like being erased from existence, you have to understand the family's central star, my sister Jessica. She was the golden child, the sun around which my parents, my entire family, orbited. Jessica was born with a certain kind of magic. She was charming and vivacious, but also possessed a manufactured fragility that made people want to protect her. Anything she wanted, she got. Every minor accomplishment was cause for a parade, and every tear she shed was a 5-alarm fire that my parents would rush to extinguish, no matter the cost. I remember her 18th birthday like it was a scene from a movie. We were all in the driveway, and my father, Mark, had this huge, ridiculous grin on his face as he pointed to the street. Parked there was a brand new convertible, a gleaming cherry red thing with a giant white bow stuck to the hood. Jessica did her classic gasp and squeal routine, and my mother, Susan, was already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, whispering about how she deserved it, how they had to dip into savings, but their little girl's smile was worth any price. As I watched Jessica hug them, I felt that familiar, hollow ache. It was the feeling of being a ghost at my own family's party, forced to applaud a spectacle that was built on a foundation of unequal love. My own 18th birthday, 2 years prior, had been a much quieter affair. I didn't want a new car. I wasn't that naive. I just asked for a little help with a down payment on a reliable 10-year-old sedan so I could get to my after-school job without a 90-minute bus ride. I laid out my plan, showed them how much I'd already saved, and asked if they could match it. My father's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, strained expression. "Money is tight, honey," he said, the phrase a constant refrain throughout my childhood. My mother chimed in with the killing blow, the line that defined our entire relationship. "Besides," she said, patting my arm, "you're so strong, so responsible. You can figure it out yourself." That was the great false narrative of our family. Jessica is sensitive. You are strong. This wasn't a compliment. It was an excuse. It was the justification for giving her everything and me nothing. Her sensitivity meant she needed the new car, the paid tuition, the endless emotional and financial support. My strength meant I was expected to fend for myself, to ask for nothing, to be an asset rather than a liability. Every time I succeeded on my own, it wasn't a source of pride for them, it was simply confirmation of their narrative. "See?" She didn't need our help after all. My independence wasn't celebrated, it was expected. It was the role I was born to play. So when I announced at 18 that I was joining the military, they didn't see it as a brave or patriotic choice. They saw it as the ultimate act of me being the strong one. In their minds, I wasn't running into a future of honor and discipline. I was running away from them, from the family I was supposedly too cold and distant to appreciate. They spun my enlistment as proof of my emotional deficiencies. It was just another way I was failing to be like Jessica, who was going to a local college and, in their words, staying close to the people who love her. They had crafted a story where she was the loving daughter, and I was the heartless runaway. Over the next decade, my career became a footnote in their lives, an inconvenient topic to be brushed past in phone calls. They never once attended a single promotion or award ceremony. I remember calling them, thrilled, the day I was promoted to captain. My mother listened for a moment before cutting in with, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Hey, let me tell you what Jessica did in her pottery class." I stood there on a base halfway across the world, holding a phone to my ear, and felt myself shrink. They missed my graduation from basic training because, they claimed, Jessica had a dance recital that weekend they just couldn't miss. I didn't see the dance recital. I just saw the empty seats in the stands, a perfect, aching void where my family was supposed to be. My deployments were an annoyance, my medals were trinkets they didn't understand, and my sacrifices were invisible. They never asked about the danger, about the friends I lost, or about the immense pressure of leadership. They just saw my life as a strange, self-imposed exile from the only world that mattered, Jessica's world. Every achievement I earned on my own was just more proof that I didn't need them, which, in their twisted logic, gave them permission to ignore me even more. It was a vicious, soul-crushing cycle. Lying there that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized they would never see me. They only saw the role they'd assigned me. So I decided for once I was going to show them who I really was. For a long time after that phone call, I just sat there, letting the tidal wave of 2 decades of memories wash over me. The hurt was a familiar companion, a dull ache that had lived in my chest for so long I barely noticed it anymore. But this time was different. The finality of their words, the casual cruelty of being erased, didn't just hurt me, it changed something inside me. The fog of pain and longing began to burn away, leaving behind an astonishing, ice-cold clarity. The goal was no longer to beg for scraps of their affection. The goal was to make them face the truth. I stood up, my movements feeling slow and deliberate, and walked to my closet. It was a standard-issue closet in a standard-issue house, but inside hung a life they knew nothing about. I pushed aside my regular clothes, and there it was, encased in a protective plastic cover. Not my daily fatigues, but my formal service uniform, the dress whites. I unzipped the bag, and the sight of it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. It was so pristine, so ordered. A world of discipline and honor captured in stark white fabric and perfectly straight lines. This was my evidence. These were my receipts. Not screenshots of texts, but something far more powerful. My hands traced the row of ribbons on the jacket, each one a chapter of my life they had never read. Medals for service in campaigns they couldn't place on a map, a commendation for valor they never asked about. And then, my eyes landed on the shoulder boards. On each one sat a single polished silver star, a symbol of rank, of sacrifice, of 1,000 impossible decisions and sleepless nights. A symbol of a reality so undeniable that not even their powerful narrative could dismiss it. The plan clicked into place in my mind, not born of rage, but of pure tactical precision. I wouldn't crash the wedding. I wouldn't cause a scene or make a tearful speech. I would obey the letter of their law. Their selfish, hurt daughter would not be there, but they had forgotten who else I was. Brigadier General Miller, on the other hand, had every reason to make an appearance to pay her respects. I turned to my laptop, my fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. I booked a flight. I packed a bag, and I carefully, reverently folded the uniform that represented everything I had become in spite of them. I wasn't going there for them anymore. I was going for me, to close a chapter on my own terms. I had my proof. I had my plan. All that was left was to choose the right moment to walk into their perfectly curated world and hold up a mirror. I timed my arrival with military precision. I walked into the country club not through the main entrance, but directly to the ballroom, waiting in the foyer until I could hear the clinking of cutlery and the gentle hum of dinner service. The venue was exactly what I'd expected, opulent, ostentatious, and designed to scream success. Through the crack in the door, I could see chandeliers dripping with crystal, tables laden with flowers, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. It was the perfect stage my parents had built for their perfect daughter's perfect day, a flawless illusion of a happy, prosperous family. Every detail was curated to project an image of effortless grace, an image that had been paid for with my invisible contributions and their blatant dismissal. With a quiet breath, I pushed the heavy, ornate doors open and stepped inside. I didn't stride in, I simply entered, coming to a stop just inside the doorway. The effect was instantaneous and more powerful than any words I could have spoken. Under the brilliant light of the chandeliers, my dress-white uniform was almost blinding. It was a stark, immaculate slash of white in a room of soft pastels and dark suits. It didn't belong, and because of that, it commanded the attention of every single person in the room. The gentle hum of conversation didn't just fade, it hit a wall and fell silent. A fork clattered onto a plate, a sound that seemed as loud as a gunshot in the sudden stillness. The music from the string quartet faltered, a violin screeching slightly before it too went quiet. One by one, heads turned. It started with the tables near the door and spread like a wave across the entire ballroom. The whispers died. The laughter stopped. Within 10 seconds, 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, filled with a mixture of confusion, curiosity, and awe. I just stood there, my posture perfect, my hands clasped loosely behind my back. I let the silence stretch, letting my presence be the only statement. This was what it felt like to be seen, not as an accessory or an afterthought, but as the main event. Across the room, I found their faces. My father, Mark, was in the middle of a hearty laugh, his face ruddy with wine and pride. I watched the laugh die in his throat, his jaw going slack as the color drained from his face, leaving behind a pale mask of pure, unadulterated shock. My mother, Susan, who was seated beside him, saw the look on his face and followed his gaze. Her hand flew to her chest, her fingers clutching the pearls at her throat as if she could ward me off. And then there was Jessica, my sister, the bride, the center of this entire universe. Her brilliant, practiced smile froze, then slowly collapsed as her brain processed the impossible sight of me. She wasn't looking at her sister, she was looking at a ghost from a life she and my parents had tried to bury. I didn't have to say a word. The uniform was my speech, my confrontation, my truth. The gleaming metals, the razor-sharp creases, and the single unmistakable silver star on each shoulder board spoke a language of authority and achievement that everyone in that room understood. It was a language my family had refused to learn, and now I was forcing them to become fluent. After a moment that felt like an eternity, there was movement. An older man at a nearby table, a distant cousin of my father's whom I knew had served in Vietnam, slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. Then another man at a different table did the same. It was a quiet, reflexive gesture of respect. That's what finally broke the spell. The cousin, a man named Robert, walked toward me, his eyes wide with a respect I had never once seen on my own father's face. He reached me and extended a hand. "General," he said, his voice low but clear in the silent room. "We had no idea." "It's an honor to have you here." My father watched this, and something inside him finally snapped. The shock in his eyes was replaced by a deep purple rage. He started moving toward me, weaving through the tables, his fists clenched at his sides. He was going to do what he'd always done, put me back in my place, hiss at me to leave, and re-establish his dominance. He opened his mouth to speak, but then he stopped. He looked from me, to Robert, to the others silent, watching guests. He couldn't do it. How could he possibly scream at a brigadier general in front of 200 witnesses? How could he explain to his friends and business partners why this decorated officer, this supposed family shame, had been uninvited? His power was gone, and he knew it. He just stood there, 5 feet away from me, utterly and completely helpless. And in the ringing silence that filled the room, I didn't feel anger or victory. I just felt quiet. For the first time in my life, I was the one who got to walk away. I held my father's gaze for a moment longer, watching the storm of fury and helplessness battle across his face. He was a king in his own kingdom, but I was no longer one of his subjects. I had become a foreign dignitary, and he had no idea what the protocol was. Without a word, I broke eye contact with him and gave a brief, respectful nod to Robert, the cousin who had shown me more honor in 30 seconds than my own family had in 30 years. Then, with the entire room still watching my every move, I turned and walked calmly toward the gift table. It was piled high with extravagantly wrapped boxes and envelopes, a monument to my sister's perceived worth. I placed my simple, plain white card on the edge of the table, a stark contrast to the glittery excess. I didn't look back at my family. I didn't need to. I could feel their eyes on me as I walked toward the doors I had entered through just 10 minutes earlier. As I reached the threshold, I could hear the silence behind me begin to break, replaced by a frantic wave of whispers. I had thrown a stone into their placid, perfect lake, and now I was walking away, leaving them to deal with the ripples. I stepped out into the quiet hallway, let the heavy doors swing shut behind me, and the muffled sound of their chaos was the sweetest music I had ever heard. My mission was complete. I had shown them the truth, not by screaming it, but by simply wearing it. The drive to the airport was surreal. It was only when I was on the highway, with the city lights blurring past my window, that my phone began to explode. It was a digital assault, a desperate, pathetic attempt to pull me back into their drama. First came the texts from my father, short, furious bursts of text filled with accusations and rage. How dare you? You humiliated us. You ruined everything. Then came the voicemails from my mother, her voice thick with performative tears, weeping about how I had selfishly destroyed Jessica's one special day, how I had made it all about me. It was the same script they had always used, but for the first time, its power was gone. I listened to the first 10 seconds of her message, and then I calmly pressed the screen. Block contact. I did the same for my father. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of peace. It was the quiet, final click of a door being locked for good. 1 year later, life is quiet now, and that quiet is something I cherish more than any medal. I live in a small apartment in a city they've never been to, a place that I chose for myself, filled with my own things. The silence isn't sterile anymore, it's peaceful. On Saturday mornings, I volunteer at a local youth leadership academy, mentoring cadets who are just starting their own journeys. I see the same fire in their eyes that I once had in mine. The desire to be part of something bigger than themselves, a world built on integrity and a shared code. These kids, my colleagues, the life I have built, this is my family now. It's a family forged in mutual respect, not in obligation or guilt. It's a family where my strength is seen as a gift, not an excuse to neglect me. I heard through Robert, who calls me every few months to check in, that my parents and sister are still singing the same old song. They tell anyone who will listen that I'm a bitter, attention-seeking child who tried to ruin Jessica's wedding. But the story doesn't stick anymore. The image of that uniform, of that star on my shoulder, was too strong. It provided a context for my entire life that their words simply can't erase. They can't spin the story when the truth was witnessed by 200 people. Their power was in their narrative, and in one silent 10-minute appearance, I had dismantled their entire reality. They no longer have any control over how the world sees me, and more importantly, they have no control over how I see myself. They wanted me to be invisible, so I became someone they couldn't ignore. But true freedom wasn't in their reaction. It was in realizing I never needed their permission to be proud of myself. That uniform wasn't a costume for revenge. It was the skin I had earned, a symbol of the fact that I had become my own hero, my own rescuer, my own family. The ultimate victory wasn't showing them who I was. It was finally, fully, and completely embracing it for myself, with no apologies. If you've ever had to build your own damn parade, leave a comment below. Your fellow generals want to hear your story.